I started on Threads with 17 followers. 2,500 hours later, I now have 11,002. I guarantee the 5 tactics I'm about to share with you are more valuable than every Threads growth guide you've bought combined. If you incorporate all 5 of these in your hook, you'll be ahead of most people who are still struggling to write good hooks. The first tactic for writing amazing hooks is to open 2 loops. This was the subject of an entire college class maybe a month or 2 ago. This is really the TLDR, the condensed version of what we discuss in that class. So let me know if you want to know where that is in the classroom, or just comment in the chat, but it's in there. Essentially, what this means is that a loop starts a story or teases some valuable information. This hints at what those 2 loops are, but we'll get to that in a second. Essentially, a loop is like when a TV show ends and it ends with "to be continued." It's creating that desire in the viewer that they should go and watch the show when the next episode comes out next week. Now, with Netflix and bingeable stuff, you can just go straight away into the next episode, but it keeps you hooked. And that's the point of this loop principle. You want to have 2 loops because a great hook does 2 things. Firstly, it grabs attention. And then secondly, it holds attention. The examples we've got for this will make sense about what the difference is there. But essentially, the success of your entire online business comes down to how well you do those 2 things. Because something in my content or Yaz's content grabbed your attention, it hooked you. And then in order to end up here, there was a CTA that got you to join the community. And that's what grabbed your attention on a bigger scale than just in order to hold your attention. There must have been something we've done inside the community to get you to engage, show up, and come along to a class like this. Great hooks aren't just something you write on Threads. They determine how well you do online, period. Because it's all about attention. Now that I've discussed what a loop is, this is how you can open 2 loops. If we take a long form post, which is like this example here, we want to open 2 loops in the hook. You've got 2 different types. One is what I call a story loop, normally in the first sentence, and the story loop will grab someone's attention. Then we've got a sentence loop. Normally we put that in the last sentence, and this holds someone's attention. All in all, both loops make readers on Threads think that they just have to read the entire post for them to close that loop. If you've been broken up with before, right? I have. And you don't know why the person broke up with you. So you need closure. And until you get that closure, you feel frustrated. You've been wronged and there's no valid reason why. You know, the person who broke up with you has to give you an answer that seems satisfactory and explains why they broke up with you. It's closing the loop. And then you feel, yeah, probably still pretty sad, but at least you've got closure and you can move on with your life. That's what this concept of loops is, but in Threads posts. Here is a more relevant example that doesn't have to do with a broken heart. This is a post from Taylor Simmons, and he was someone that we actually had as a guest speaker inside Full Circle, a paid cohort we did a couple of months ago. As I was saying earlier, we've got 2 loops. The story loop is one that you can put in the first sentence of your hook. It's literally just, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you include the space, 7 characters. This is one of the most concise yet most effective hooks that many of us have experimented a lot with, because it's telling the reader, if a reader is around this age, it makes that person think, I'm 32. I wonder what Taylor has done with his life so far. That's essentially what these 7 characters are doing. It's opening a story loop. This next sentence goes on to continue that story loop by saying what Taylor was like or doing in his 20s. More relevantly, for the example of loops, the next type of loop we have is a sentence loop. And The example here is here's the most profound lessons I learned that changed my life. And this is a sentence loop because it's telling me as a reader that I need to continue reading to learn what these lessons are that changed Talon's life. I call this a sentence loop because it's the way the sentence is structured that makes it such that the reader feels like they need to continue reading. And in this case, it could be something as simple as a colon that's normally implies just in normal English, like stuff is coming after this colon. Another thing is it's just telling us that here's the most important lessons or the most profound lessons. We know that's opening up this loop and the lessons will be beneath the thread. So that is the concept of loops in the hook of a long form post. We want to try and open two of them, a story loop and a sentence loop. Any questions about that one before we move on to the next one? Feel free to speak up. If you've got a question in the chat, put it in there as well, and then Leisha will let me know. All right, moving on. Next one. This is one of the more recent tactics about hooks that I've learned. Do you want to nail the first 5 words? Bit of an explanation for this. This is what you want to do in your hook. So thanks for that. When I say you need to nail the first 5 words, in the post for Talon, it was I'm 30, and that's just 2. So ideally, you want to do this in even 3 words if you can, or in this case, 2 if you consider the number a word. And that's why this hook is so effective for so many people as well, because it's just so concise. Why do we need to nail the first 5 words? As I said earlier, I've spent 2,500 hours studying threads, whether that is through everything we do inside the community or starting the first Threads newsletter, Threads growth community, writing all of the posts, etc. Please believe me when I say that you do just have the first 5 words. Otherwise, people will just keep scrolling. This is the real kicker. And I don't think enough people fully realize this because it's almost a hard truth to fully understand and internalize. Based on this principle alone, this means that 99.9% of your entire post, it's a waste unless you nail those first 5 words. Let that sink in for a second. So you go and write your post. I don't know how long you spend writing a long form post, but it still takes me ages. All of this content here took 4 hours to put together when I include little diagrams. Normally, long form posts don't take that long for me, but this one was important because hooks are the most important. Again, this means that in theory, I know that these 2 lines work. Let's say I started with something else and it wasn't this sentence. That could reduce the effectiveness of everything else in this post by 50, 70, 80, even 90%. That means that for the sake of putting stuff on social media, no one's going to see it, so it's a waste. This is how we need to nail the first 5 words. Here are 5 proven ways you can do that. You can use numbers. You can call out a group. A direct call out would be something like dear creators. You can use a negativity bias. I've used this as a hook before, and this post got around 500 likes and tens of thousands of views. The negativity bias is hardwired in our DNA because we evolved to have negative or harmful things on our radar so that we don't get attacked by animals in the wilderness. Another one is we want to use emotional language. The word mind-blowing here in 5 mind-blowing productivity hacks is a good example of that. Another way that we can nail the first 5 words is to open a story loop or sentence loop. With this principle in mind, here's an example that applies 3 of these 5 different methods. The more of these you can incorporate in a hook, the better. This is my pinned post. We've got 7 things about threads you. These 5 words alone were enough to get people to read the rest. One of those 5 things that we can do for the first 5 words is a number. Then we've got a call out. You could have something direct for a call out like dear content creators or dear threads creators. But here is an indirect one because it's saying if you're on threads, it's already relevant and it's already calling out those people. But using a keyword like threads, or if your thing is bodybuilding, 7 things about bodybuilding. If you are interested in bodybuilding and you saw that word bodybuilding in this post, you probably read it. Or 7 things about Instagram growth or whatever. That's the call out, and it's indirect in this case. And then we've also got the sentence loop in this first part alone, because 7 things about threads, this part alone is telling us that the rest of the post somewhere is going to have 7 things about threads. If I want to know what those are, I need to continue reading. And that is the first 5 words principle. The second of 5 for writing incredible hooks. Any questions about this one? If you don't have any questions, a thumbs up or a love heart if you're finding this useful. Yaz put a hand raise. Was that an accidental hand raise? Any questions? Questions are good. Questions are how you learn it. So I'm happy to keep going. Please speak now if you've got something about this. Yeah, that's true. Peter says it's just a pet peeve if someone says it's mind-blowing and it's not. Very true. I'm glad you mentioned that because I feel called out. I did a post that had the mind-blowing thing in it the other day. I know. I posted it, and the next day I was looking at it, and glad to hear that. So I was looking at that post and I had some distance from it. I wasn't so attached and thinking, yeah, Lennox, that really wasn't mind-blowing. So it will pay off when whatever the mind-blowing thing is actually mind-blowing, but it will really flop when it's not. That's the thing with the use of emotional language. Make sure it's justified. Okay. The third principle, Amma, you were saying that this was something a bit new to you, and it's just a more extreme version of the 80-20 principle, where it's like the Pareto principles. Percent of your results will come from 20% of your actions, the best 20%. And that applies in every aspect of life. For instance, there are a set number of compound movements. If you go to the gym and do weightlifting, that will probably get you 80% of the results. Those 5 compound movements, that's only 5 movements out of the hundreds, even thousands of potential exercises you can do. The amount of foods that you eat as well, out of all the different foods that are available to eat, you're probably going to get the most results in terms of health and just general well-being by eating the best 20% of them. It applies to everything. And the same thing goes for hooks, but in a slightly different way. And we're using the 90-10 principle. Basically, this is just saying that you want to spend 90% of your effort, or you might think of this as time, on the first 10% of your post. The first 10% in this context is your hook. You need to spend 90% of your effort on the first 10% of your post, because just take how important you think hooks currently are, and then times that by 10,000. You still don't fully understand how important hooks are. Wasn't understanding the concept well, but you think you get the basics. It is something that you will learn as you do. Like, it's good to have these principles and the tactics in mind. And that's the 10% of the understanding, but the 90% of the understanding is through their application. Coming back to this specific example, the way that we can actually implement that is for you to write your post, just brain dump it. Then you want to spend 5 to 10 minutes brain dumping as many potential hooks as possible. Like, I normally like to do it after I've written the bulk of my post or the body. Either way, you can do it before and then write your post and then do it after, but doing it after will definitely help, because oftentimes the body of your post turns out a little bit differently to what you initially intended it to be. If I had written my hook and it said, here are the 9 most effective principles for writing great hooks, but when I actually wrote the body of it, there are actually 5, then obviously the hook is a bit misleading. And that's just a minor change, but it goes to show that the reality of the post can change after you write a hook at the start. So spend 5 to 10 minutes just brain dumping as many hooks as possible, and then ask ChatGPT to rank them from best to worst. That's what I did for the post that this class represents on Threads. I knew that my first 2 sentences were going to be what they are. I started on Threads with 17 followers. 2,500 hours later, I now have 11,200 friends, because those 2 sentences are proven to work for me over the last year. This is what I did. Well, I asked ChatGPT, or in this case, Threads GPT, which you get access to in Full Circle and Mini Circle. I asked ThreadGPT to give me the best version of the third sentence in my hook out of all the ones I brain dumped here. But the main point is for you to see the quantity of hooks there. When I was doing this brain dump, I wasn't thinking about quality at all. I just wanted to get down as many ideas as possible. I asked it to rank them from best to worst and explain the reasoning. This is the one that ThreadGPT picked, and it is, I guarantee these 5 tactics are more valuable than every Threads growth guide you've bought combined. This just speaks to how good ThreadGPT is. I picked my top 3, and then I asked Leisha and Yaz in our team chat which one they liked the best. I didn't tell them that ThreadGPT had already picked this one, but then Yaz and Leisha also picked that one. That is the process of the 90-10 principle. And it's just forcing you to remember, by putting in more effort in the hook, that it's the most effective and productive use of your time whenever you write content, period. Anywhere. Email subject line, YouTube title, the first 5 seconds of every video, post inside a community, a message you're sending to a friend. Anything and everything that is content, the first few words of it, the first few seconds, always going to be the most important. So if you want that thing to land, use the 90-10 principle. Any questions about this one before we move on to the 4th? Or comments? Or reactions? Are we still awake? Yaz is. Thanks, Yaz. Thanks, Peter. Leisha, thank you. Okay. I'm just going to assume that this stuff is being explained clearly enough if there aren't questions. You got to ask one question at least some point, please. Next one. This is a Saints College classic for many of us. Becca, you've just said makes total sense, but it's funny how some of the most duh stuff doesn't occur to us until it's spoken explained. Isn't that life, Becca? It makes intuitive sense, but until you've got a framework to encapsulate what it is, it's hard to really appreciate that thing's significance. I totally get what you're saying there. Yeah, living and learning. That's it. 4th hook tactic is proof, promise, plan. For those of you who aren't aware, or even if you are, the reminder is always good because it's just timeless. You should establish, firstly, the proof. And this is really answering the question, why should I believe you? So say I'm a reader on Threads and I see your post, whether it's a short form or a long form. This is more to do in long form though, because short forms, you've just literally got less characters and words. But you need to tell someone, give real evidence that they should believe the content that you're about to give them. They should take it seriously and perceive it as valuable. That's what you do with the proof part. Then you've got the promise, which is answering the question for the reader. Well, what is it? What's in it for me? What benefit am I going to get from this? And then lastly, the plan is, how do I get that benefit? So that's the framework, proof, promise, plan. This is for Alex Hormozi's YouTube framework. I remember learning this back in maybe April last year. And then I thought, I wonder if this applies to Threads content. And then I started doing a lot of testing, and turns out it does. And now a lot of Threads creators who are doing well on the platform raved about that framework. If you look for this on Threads, you'll see it everywhere in the hook of a long form. But why do we use this? Honestly, because no one gives a fuck about who you are or what you've done on a social media platform. Your friends will, those who follow you, but what about all the people who can potentially see your post who don't already follow you and have no idea who you are? Why should they take what you're about to say seriously when there are literally like millions of other posts on the platform? To make them take your content and the words that you're writing seriously, you need to give them a reason to do that. And you do that, you give them a compelling reason to take your stuff seriously by showing your proof on the subject matter. An example to show the difference between having proof and not having proof. Take this hook. I hate to break it to you, but the justice system is broken. Versus, I studied law and I hate to break it to you, but the justice system is broken. Thumbs up if you think the first option is better than the second. Thumbs up if you think the second option is better than the first. Okay. 2 thumbs up. Emma, lovely. Cool. Yep. I see an in real life thumbs up from Captain Yaz. Okay. And it's as simple as saying, I study law, and I did study law. In this case, that's the proof. The fact that I studied law. So you might be wondering, how do I establish proof if I haven't studied something that I now post about on Threads? That's what we'll look at now. How do I actually use the proof promise plan framework? Look at proof first. There are 2 ways that you can establish proof in content, full stop. First way is you can do epic shit and post about it. And that is just called earned proof. You're earning that credibility by doing stuff. The second way is to study epic people and then post about them. And that is borrowed proof. You're stealing someone's credibility and writing about it. And that means that you don't need to have the credibility yourself because that person you're writing about already has it. Proof is the most important element among all 3, just because of this intense, subconscious, and sometimes conscious preconception that everyone is talking shit on social media. And that's what I want you to believe. Think about whenever you're about to post something, especially a long form post on Threads. Assume that everyone who will see this assumes that you're talking shit and you have no idea what you're talking about. And that's an extreme point, but not as much as you would think. Proof is the most important thing. So how do you actually do this stuff? Like, it's all well and good for me to say, do epic shit and post about it and study epic people and post about them. There is also an example of like earning proof in it, but there are a bunch of ways that you can do this. And I guarantee you that all of you have proof. It's just not always immediate. Peter, hopefully this feels fresh for you because we had a call last week and we were talking about productivity. One of the questions I asked you was, how long have you been doing this and how many hours? I can't remember the exact figure. Maybe if you could put it in the chat. Initially, when I was asking Peter just about like productivity, wasn't really sure what the proof could be. But then we started speaking about how long have you been studying productivity? And then we just reverse engineered. Maybe it was like 2 to 3 years. And then how many hours each day? And it was something like 3 times 365. So let's just say it was for 3 years. So 1,095 days and about 3 hours a day. That's 3,285 hours. So what I'm trying to say here is that you can effectively establish proof and show your proof in your content by literally just saying the number of hours spent studying your thing. And when I say studying, this could also be practicing, doing, whatever the verb is that's appropriate for your thing, use that. But number of hours spent is very effective to establish proof. Another thing is, Peter said, we all have more proof than we realize. It might feel uncomfortable, like flexing this stuff initially. Please trust me on this. You got to do it. Another way, Peter, you started thinking about it and it's actually higher than 300 or whatever it was. And it just goes to show you got to use those numbers if you've got them behind you. And it doesn't need to be in the thousands, by the way. And I'll show you an example of why that's the case in a second. But another way that you can establish proof is by putting the amount of money spent. It basically says that what that thing is that you spent money on is valuable. So therefore, I should take the content that you're giving me seriously. I could say I spent $10,000 learning how to build an online course from someone who has made millions of dollars versus I spent $10 learning how to make an online course. Hopefully it's clear that the first one is much more compelling. Now let's look at the promise. This is basically answering the question in the reader's mind, what is in it for me? What do I get from this post? Why should I continue reading it? 3 very simple promises that apply in every form of effective content. You can promise to save time, you can promise to solve a pain point, and you can promise to make something easy. Save time, solve pain, make something easy. Then we have the plan. Specifically, you can state the specific number of whatever tips, tactics, hacks, lessons, mistakes, myths, insights. I don't know. You get the idea. State the specific number of things that you'll write about to deliver that promise. Here is our example. This is a post that I've probably posted 3 times now. This is a clear example of borrowed proof, but there are also instances of earned proof in it. The example of borrowed proof is me literally just saying, this is Danco. And then I enhance the proof for those who aren't aware of who he is by saying he made $4.1 million in 2023. So right there, we've got 2 sentences that highlight the proof of what I'm about to discuss. I spent $6,000 and 220 hours. And that is coming back to what I was saying earlier about earning proof by spending money, spending time. Side note, I forgot to put in there as well. You can also earn proof by having degrees, mentors, awards, etc. There's the instance of earned proof in this post. Then turning to the plan, it's me saying 7 lessons from Dan's mastermind. And this is telling readers, okay, if you read this post, you will get 7 lessons. So you should continue reading until we get to the 7th. And then finally, we've got the promise. Steal them to reinvent yourself. So the promise of my hook is to reinvent yourself, or rather, you will be able to reinvent yourself by reading these lessons. That is proof, promise, plan. Any questions about that? There is a specific lesson inside Saints College in this. Leisha, if you wouldn't mind, if you're there, to go to the college tutorials page. And then the headline for the lesson about proof, promise, plan is something like, this framework got me 1,000 followers from 4 posts. And if you would be so kind to just link that in the Google Meet chat, just in case you haven't seen that one, it's a bit more of a deep dive and some more examples about using this framework in practice. Oh, this is actually the 5th and final tactic for writing incredible hooks. It's what I call the 3-sentence rule. Pretty self-explanatory. Make your hook 3 sentences long. Why? After posting over 2,000 times since July 10, 2023, and spending 5 months creating the hook book with 420 of the best viral posts I've ever seen. By the way, the hook book is in Saints College. Just search in the search bar, hook book, and I think it's the 3rd post that comes up in the results. And through all of that experience, I've realized that the hooks that steal attention, they blow up in the comments and they get you hundreds of followers overnight, they're on average 3 sentences long. Some of them are 5. Not many that do well are more than 5, but on average, they're 3 sentences long. In light of that, here is how you tie and implement everything we've discussed so far. Open 2 loops, nail the first 5 words, use proof, promise, plan, and use the 90-10 principle. This is how you implement all 4 by following the 3-sentence rule. In the first sentence, you want to open a story loop and nail the first 5 words, because obviously the first sentence will include the first 5 words, or if it's a really short one, like I'm 30, then it's the first 2 words. In the second sentence, you want to show your proof. Could be earned proof, could be borrowed proof. And then in the 3rd sentence, you want to open a sentence loop and then highlight the promise and then state the plan. And as you try to do all of that in the first 3 sentences of your hook, follow the 90-10 principle. As we discussed earlier, brain dump a bunch of different options for each. Ask ChatGPT or ThreadsGPT what the best versions are and rank them from best to worst. You'll notice that this is essentially the same hook that I used in the post that today's class is based on, with a few changes. Namely, I've since spent an extra 1,000 hours and gained an extra 6,000 friends. instead of the only 5 tactics you need to grow like crazy, promise in this class is it's just more valuable than all the Threads growth guides combined. Here is the deconstructing what the 3-sentence rule is. As we've spoken about, the story loop is just in the first 5 words alone. I started on Threads with, and this is enough to get people to read the next 2 words to make it 7, because people want to know where I began. And this is implying, it's making people think, oh, okay, so Lennox started on Threads with this amount. Where's he at now? People love a transformation story because the idea of having a transformation themselves is very inspiring and motivating. That is my story loop, and that's the first 5 words. Then the second sentence is 1,500 hours later, I now have 6,250 friends. That's my proof. Nothing too fancy about that. I'm just saying how many hours I've spent. I'm also having a contrast of the results. Started with 17, now 6,250 at the time 4 months ago. Finally, third sentence is here are the only 5 tactics you need to grow like crazy. And here we have 3 different tactics or elements that we've discussed so far in this class. The last sentence is the sentence loop. And there are 2, maybe 3 parts of it that make it a sentence loop. It's basically implying if I want to know what these 5 tactics are, I need to continue reading after this sentence. I've got a colon there, which just basic English punctuation. The colon implies that something is going to come after it. And the words here are also saying, okay, there's stuff coming after this sentence. If you don't have some kind of reason for people to continue reading your long form post, they're not going to read it. And that is one of the most obvious things ever. But I've seen many examples inside our community of people not having something like this in the last sentence of their hook that just tells people they should continue reading to get more information. Then these other 2 elements, the only 5 tactics you need, that's the plan. It's telling people, this is what I'm going to give you, or this is how I'm going to give you the promise. And the promise being to grow like crazy. And that is the 3-sentence rule. So in summary, 5 crazy Threads growth tactics. You want to open 2 loops, story loop in the first sentence loop in the last sentence of the hook. You want to nail the first 5 words. And this is normally done through one of 5 things. Use numbers, call out a group, use negativity bias, use emotional language, and ideally use as many of those as possible, and open a story loop or a sentence loop. Then the other tactic we discussed was use the 90-10 principle. Spend 90% of your time or effort on the first 10% of the post, which is the hook. Apply proof, promise, plan. Show your proof, why people should believe you. State what the promise is to make it something that people want. And then state the plan. How are you going to give people what they want? And finally, follow the 3-sentence rule by essentially doing those 4 prior things in 3 sentences. Don't waste your money on another Threads growth guide. Reread this post, take action, thrive on Threads in 2025. And a few notes before we shift into the announcement of the winner of the Senior Dogs Scholarship, and I'll explain why it's called Senior Dogs Scholarship in a second. Before we go to that, please comment on that post if you haven't already, because it will be very valuable and completely free. With this 3-sentence rule, it's really hard to fit these 4 things in 3 sentences. This is where the 90-10 principle is going to come in handy, just spending more time trying to make it more concise and distill it down into the core elements. Because this obviously didn't come naturally. It took 1,500 hours to I just wanted to make that clear, that don't beat yourself up or think that you're not good at this because you can't fit it into 3 sentences. That's normal. I promise if you just keep practicing, you'll be able to get to that point where you can write a really good 3-sentence. So I was actually just reading it's already an instant favorite book of mine, and it's called The One Thing. And I've been talking about this with Captain Yaz, Captain Leisha, because it's part of our goal setting for 2020. These were a few quotes that I just read just over an hour ago before we started that I felt were very relevant to this idea of writing great hooks and trying to actually implement those 5 things that we just discussed. Let me start with this one. Firstly, the path is one of an apprentice learning and relearning the basics on a never ending journey of greater experience and expertise. And I felt like this was applicable to me because even though I'm here talking about these 5 principles about hooks, I always want to adopt this mindset of a beginner's mind, which is a practice in meditation and mindfulness. And I guess you call it being an apprentice, because just because I've spoken about this stuff, I don't ever want to feel like I am an expert, because once I think I'm an expert, it implies I've finished my learning. So I always want to keep an open mind to learning new things. That definitely applies to me and to you. The next one is time on task over time eventually beats talent every time. And this is one that I've internalized hugely. When I started on Threads with 17 followers, I had no idea about any of this stuff. And it took 2,500 hours to get to this point. This is where the time on task of 2,500 hours will beat people who've got the talent. Because if they rely on that talent alone, they eventually give up. Because hard work comes inevitably. And when hard work comes and the natural talent isn't there, they just quit. So I think about that, the time on task, more hours, more reps, it really does help. The purposeful person follows the simple rule that a different result requires doing something different. Make this your mantra and breakthroughs become possible. Another way to put this is, I think it's an Einstein quote, but I also think it's misattributed to Einstein as well. But it goes something like, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, but expecting different results. There will be few of you who don't make an effort to implement any of what we just spoke about. Please don't let that be you, because if you're not getting the results you currently want on Threads, it means you are doing something ineffectively, which means that you should be open to trying something completely new. The reason why some people won't do that is because trying new things is uncomfortable, because new is not, learning new things is not easy. Please just get out of your comfort zone, embrace that growth mindset of trying something new and failing at it, because the more you fail at it and then realize you can learn from each failure, the better you will get.